Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Quilt National 2021. This is the best of contemporary quilts. And this exhibition is produced and circulated by the Dairy Barn Art Center in Athens, Ohio. Today, we're thrilled to present Donalee Kennedy, one of our 30 exhibiting artists. But first, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. Everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize the chat function in your control panel to ask questions. We will monitor your questions throughout the presentation and be sure to leave a bit of time at the end to answer them during the Q&A portion. Next, live captioning is available for this artist talk, and you can access those by clicking on the closed caption icon and selecting Show Subtitle. Also, please keep in mind that because we are presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth for internet stability. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. And lastly, to get everyone comfortable, go ahead and click on the chat function in your control panel to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from. Okay, thank you all. And now to you, Donalee.
Thanks, Kat. It's such an honor to be invited to talk to you about my piece, Reaching Out 8, which you see here, how I arrived at making it, who I am and where I've been, and a little bit about my process. To me, Quilt National is equal to the Olympics for art quilters. I became aware of Quilt National in 2012 when I first started sewing art quilts. And I'd heard of the caliber of the artists that were participating and the history of how it got started. And I did a lot of research. And so I was thinking, wow, wouldn't that be just so cool to be involved in that? And so many of my dear friends who might be here on this call would recognize that as my delusional nature shining through, because I do believe I can accomplish just about anything I put my mind to. So my story would be so simple if it all started just right there in 2012 when I'd first heard about Quilt National. But of course it doesn't. And thank goodness for that, because that's how you build up all these wonderful experiences. But I describe myself as a textile artist. And I love to improv machine piece. And I know that's kind of a mouthful, but it just perfectly describes my process. I make every single decision about what goes where, and every finished piece is original from start to finish. I want to tell you my story, and so you can see my struggles and my growth. And even though we're all unique, I hope you'll see our similarities. But first, I do really want to thank the Ohio Arts Council and the Rife Gallery, the executive leadership team and the board of directors, and especially the great gallery team of Kat Sheridan and Amy Westman. I can't tell you how fun it's been to work with you, and I'm excited about thinking up some future projects that we might be able to work on. But the contribution that the Ohio Arts Council makes to Ohio and the thriving arts community is really amazing. And I just really appreciate all of you so much. So my professional journey really started back in the 80s. And when my daughter was 12 years old, she was enrolled in a medals class at a local art center. And the piece you're looking at here is the very first piece of jewelry I'd made, except for one I made when I was about 5 years old out of electrical wire. But this was the first official piece. And I'd had to travel about 45 weeks out of the year for business. And so when I'd come home on the weekends, my daughter and I would reconnect by she showing me what she had learned that week at the medals class. And it was just magic. When I saw the solder flow for the first time, it was like, whoa, this is crazy. And it was just so magical. And eventually I would wear pieces to work, and I started selling them to friends and neighbors, and eventually to Schreiman Jewelers up in Cleveland, which is where I lived at the time. But it was when I moved to northern Wisconsin in the 90s to open my retail business that represents the biggest chunk of my art career, art story. The business I named Donalee Designs, I registered when I was 18 years old. I was just so sure I was going to have something to do with design. And so I moved to Bayfield, Wisconsin, which is a beautiful small town, a tourist town on the south shore of Lake Superior. And here are just a few shots. It honestly looks like a movie set at certain times of the year. It's such a quaint working town, but it is so heavily trafficked in the summer that sometimes I would look at my watch at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd go, oh my gosh, I haven't even gone to the bathroom yet at the store. It was so busy, which was great, but it was also exhausting. But then in the winter, we could relax and enjoy our time and visit with our friends, and it was great. But one of the things I really loved was the fact that it was a working studio. So you can see in this photo in the top left, that's one of my apprentices that was working at the bench, and I had a side-by-side bench. So we sat there all day and talked about jewelry or art or life or whatever. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was standing at the front counter talking to the customers and learning what they wanted and how I could work what I loved doing into their life. And it was just a joy to be able to do that. And I was so drawn to the feeling of starting with a piece of sterling silver, a flat sheet of sterling silver, and maybe a beautiful stone or two, but not always. And this type of jewelry making is called fabrication, as it would, which I think is just so interesting that's the name of the process. But so by working with my hands and finding out what I could do, I was curious about how to make things and how to make them sound beautiful and jangle. But it was really the fact that some of these pieces really mattered to people. And that what I was doing was a contribution to our community and to the lives of my friends and neighbors. And, you know, it certainly was not and is not brain surgery, but it became an important part of my life to be making pieces for people. And I still get a Valentine. I was just showing Kat the other day. I get a Valentine from one of my customers who I made their engagement ring. And I just think that's so sweet. I just really love it. And these are just a few of the pieces that I made during that time. But it was that combination of my curiosity and the emotion and the physicality of it that drives my art practice today. Here are a couple of bangles, or a cuff bracelet and a bangle. And I'm showing these to you because that cuff with what looks like fabric swatches, I made, it was one of the main big pieces I had made while I was in business. And I had no idea what I was going to be doing when I got done making jewelry. So I think that this is, it was in me, just waiting to kind of come out. And these bangles that are wrapped in silk sari, I have silk sari in my inventory right now to be used in, a project at some point in time. But while I was a jeweler, this is like a recap of some of my favorite pieces. I sold to wholesale and some of the stores you might recognize of Dayton's or Marshall Field's, Macy's, Saks Fifth Avenue, and several wonderful lesser known galleries and shops in pockets of the country I liked to visit. So it was a wonderful combination. And then there was a one-time health issue that made me think about life in specific and in general. And I decided I wanted more art and less commerce. And so it was at that time I decided that I would leave my jewelry business, close it. And there are still some people who are mad at me for doing that. But just because someone is good at something doesn't mean they have to keep doing it. It was important for me to be able to expand and move on to something else. So within a month or so of closing the store, I converted my working studio into a sewing studio, an art studio. And there I could explore, and I started sewing and dyeing fabric and printing and painting. And I was just digging into everything I could possibly find out about this new industry. And I worked there almost every day. And then I would also invite other local friends who were artists, and we would cross pollinate. And it was just very exciting. We had a great time. And I needed to explore and learn because I was so unfamiliar with some of the terms that people were using. But when I was a jeweler, I thought of myself as a businesswoman. I didn't think of myself as a artist. Even though now I realize I was using all of the principles of art and design, and they were important to why my pieces turned out and could have longevity. But you might ask why I didn't know that vocabulary. And so I'll step back and say my educational piece of the puzzle, I skipped that. I learned after graduating from high school, I went right into the workforce. And while working full-time, I took a few courses at the University of Minnesota, but it just wasn't for me. I was too impatient. I needed to know now. I couldn't wait a whole quarter to figure out, what was happening. I wanted to be knee deep in the business of life and of art and business right away. So over the course of about 7 years, I worked my way up the ladder at my local department store, Dayton's, which was in Minneapolis, where I lived at the time. And then they bought Marshall Field's. And of course, sadly, both stores are no longer in business. They were all bought out by Macy's somewhere in the 2006s. Anyway, back to my part. During the 60s, businesses were finally starting to move women into executive positions. And I was really proud to be part of that. And that movement, it seems like we're still having some of those same issues, but things are improving. But I was proud to be a couple of times the first in this particular department store as a female buyer, or gain some accomplishment. And so that was really fun. I also was probably the first female to turn down a knock on my door at market at 2:30 in the morning when one of the VPs showed up and said he had some papers for me to sign. And I said, well, whatever you want me to sign, I'll sign it in the morning. So, it's not all cookies and ice cream. There were lessons and work to be done, but I continued to work my way up the ladder. And I was very happy to feel like I was learning my master's degree of retail at Dayton's. They were a fantastic company to work for. So after many years of being with Dayton's, I was offered a position with a manufacturing company that made kids' socks and sleepwear. And while I was there, I learned about the knitting mills and textiles and made many contacts with some of those major stores that I mentioned to you that I sold my work to, because I'd already had a relationship with them at that point. And so, but I tired of traveling. I mean, all that travel was really hard. It was difficult. And after many years of doing that, I just decided I had to stop. And so, but in the meantime, I was on weekends, I would teach myself everything I needed to know about jewelry making. And that's when I moved in 1992, I ventured off and left the comfortable paycheck and moved up to Bayfield, Wisconsin. So that brings us back to, 2012. So when I started to sew art, I thought, what is an art quilt? Why do we have to call it art quilt? We don't call a painting art painting, and we don't call sculpture art sculpture. But because of the history of quilting, I think that the word art is put in front of it to help elevate it and to help people understand that these are not for beds, but for walls. But my childhood was filled with sewing, but it was mostly garments or curtains or doll clothes when I was very young. So quilts for the wall was a really unique idea to me and intrigued me. I was very curious, and I did a bunch of web research to find out, what was this all about. And I found the group called SAQA, Studio Art Quilt Associates. And they were still are a fabulous resource for like-minded people and very interesting artists. The diversity is really amazing to me. But I soon realized that my hands that I had relied on so much as a jeweler didn't know how to do this sewing and quilting and piecing, and my brain understood some of it, but it didn't. And so it was really humbling to go from being very skilled in one area of a craftsmanship situation to going to having to start over. But with the help of SAQA, I started taking classes. This was pre-COVID, so I could take in-person classes. And I learned about color and design and composition and just art in general. I was completely smitten, and I learned about as many different aspects of the industry as I could possibly do. I studied dyeing, so that was that. This is up on my property in Wisconsin. I would hand dye fabric and hang them on the line to dry. And then I studied drawing. These are actually vectored sketches. I drew them by hand with pencil and then scanned them into my computer. And then I made hundreds and hundreds of small compositions to study composition. These are about 4-inch square pieces. And I learned to dye beautiful silk in both scarf form or yardage form and framed them here. And some of the pieces I would use, I would then decided that I could learn how to design a pattern or a fabric. So here's an example of watercolor. And then I've shown here how it started out just as a watercolor. Then I borrowed the pieces and parts and then turned it into a pattern. I've tried acrylic painting and stamp carving and printing, jelly printing, all kinds of things. And what I have found is that art isn't just a thing, it's a way of life. And it confirmed, all of this studying confirmed that I am indeed an artist and that I live the life of an artist. My studio isn't just a room in my house. My whole house, excuse me, is a studio. And there's always room for rocks and handmade things. And much of the art that I have just literally covering my walls is done by friends of mine that I just really treasure. But what I saw with all of this learning was that I could side by side with my quilting, I could create patterns. And in my 5-year plan, my goal is to be a licensed pattern designer so that when I live to be 120, I'll still have an income coming in, and I may not be able to climb ladders to make my 8-foot pieces anymore. So these are just some of my patterns that I have created. And it's just really fun. And I use third-party companies to print on demand. So you can order these through various companies. I've never ordered a pair of leggings, but it's a possibility. But cups and mugs and all kinds of fun things. So those are just some of the fun things to order from a third-party person. Some of these are from Spoonflower or Society 6 or Redbubble. And it's a good way to have a passive income stream. Again, I think as a businesswoman / artist, it's important that we are sustainable and that we can continue to do what our heart calls us to do. So this is a piece that I made, like it was the first piece I made, serious piece I made after studying with Nancy Crow. And for those of you who may not know, although if you're a friend of mine, you know who Nancy Crow is because I talk about her all the time. She is a mentor and she's a friend. I would call her a friend now. When I first started going to her retreats in 2013, I didn't know how to do this. And she teaches art. She doesn't answer questions for you. If you ask her a question, she will dig it out of you so you answer the question. And that to me is a really important factor. But anyway, so she looked at this piece and it didn't have the black and white lines in it. So I don't have a picture of that because I was so new into all this. I didn't realize how important it was that I wanted to go back and look at reference shots. But if you can visualize this without the black and white lines in it. And she saw it and she said, well, it's okay. It's good. There's nothing wrong with it. But in a couple of years, you'll be very disappointed in yourself that you didn't do more to it. So I took it home. And this was when we still lived in 2 locations. We were snowbirding in Columbus, Ohio, and we lived in Wisconsin. And on the ride home to Wisconsin, a bird hit our windshield and just shattered it all over. And we got it fixed. It was no big deal. Everything was fine. And a couple of days later, after we got home and we started unpacking and everything, and I started getting back into working in the studio, all of a sudden I started cutting this piece up and adding these black and white lines. And it's just so interesting to me because my process is when I'm done with a piece, I'll sit down and literally write a critique of the piece and describe it and in a very kind of officious way. But not, it's just me and myself and we're talking to ourselves. But I realized that this now represents that windshield crash and how every single thing that comes at me in a day can be and might be interpreted in my work that I wasn't aware of. And so I just think that's really fascinating. So now I'm just going to show you a few pieces. This was a early work and I called this my front yard. So this is a very typical piece of piecing. I did do a lot of the hand printing in this one and I was exploring on quilting and things. This one I call sandstone. Let me think about this. Sandstone dreams or something, because we have a lot of sandstone up in Wisconsin. And so I was just exploring. I didn't really have a style or a real practice at this time. These are all just exercises I was doing to learn and to teach my hand and my mind how to work together and learn how to do this. So this piece is called Witch Path at Sunrise. And so you'll see these black and white, actually these are gray and white, so it's not quite as dramatic. But there is not one single straight line seam going either vertically or horizontally. And this piece now lives in California with the owners. This one I call Family Circle. Here again, I'm testing out different formats, and a format is how I line up, how I put my pieces together. And so this is a vertical format, you can see. Family Circle, of course, that's me in the middle and all of my family and both blood and by choice. And this one is called Half Tea. Here I was exploring a motif. So I can't remember exactly what year this was, but this was after having the motif class with Nancy. So she encourages us to work with a motif. This one is called Forest Edge. Again, a reflection of my living up in northern Wisconsin. And then this is an example of a more recent work. And I started making sketches, black and white fabric sketches of pieces and parts that I wanted to try to incorporate into my work. And so you'll see this arcing curve show up quite a lot in my work. And when I see that, I know that it's from me. It's the way my body and my arm hit the table with the rotary cutter. So it's very authentic. So I call this improv piecing, but I always like to add the word thoughtful in front of that, because while it's improv, because at the beginning I stand at my design wall, and that's what this top left-hand larger picture is about. I use black strips of fabric that I've cut about a ½ inch, and gray strips. And the black strips I use as my seam lines. And I do that in a very specific but casual way. I have an idea in my head and I'm like drawing with my pieces of fabric on the wall that it sticks to, so I don't have to make any effort. If I like the line, then I pin it a couple of places. And so this shows you a short little series. Once I have the black lines on the wall, I take a picture of it, and then I scan it into my computer, and then I can add other colors to it. So down here on the bottom in those 3 smaller pictures, you can see different color options that I gave myself. And I did this through Adobe. I don't know, I can't remember if this was Photoshop or Illustrator, but one of those. And it just helps me see where my colors are, what colors I want to use. And I make sure I get my values right, because value is so important. And then you can see that I went with the one that's up on the wall to the left of my actual piece. And once I have that decided, then I start pulling my palette, and then I start filling in. And the gray lines are big overall arching, where I feel like it's like a segment, and those are going to be my final seams. Before I realized that I could use my computer, I did grids and graphs manually. This is an example of that. And a friend of mine from Florida, Lisa Arndt, quilted this. It's just, she did such a beautiful job. And this is a piece that's on my wall right now, currently, one of them. And it's about 84 inches square. And it's part of my Reaching Out series, which is a continuation of a series I've been working on for quite a while. And so this gives you a pretty good view of how I work. And it's messy. It's very messy. I could show you the floor, but it would just look like a pile of fabric. But you can see I've got little markings on the wall telling me what colors I think I want in there. But inevitably, as I'm piecing things together, it doesn't turn out like that. And so I change it. I respond to what is going on at the time. And that's why it's called art. And you can see that this piece just about fills up my wall. And so it's a big commitment, but I'm in the process of making 5 of these between now and, I don't know, August, September, something like that. And I think, and I don't know if it's just because I just love tools, or because I was a jeweler for so long and tools were such a big part of that aspect of my life, but I love tools. And so just recently I bought a frame for my Q20, and this just shows you how big it is. My room is like 14 feet by 11 and a half or something. And so you can see it literally fills the whole wall. I'm pretty committed. And this is my walk-in closet that I fondly call my fabric vault. There's hundreds of yards of Kona fabric. I also buy a lot of hand-dyed from a friend of mine, Lisa Reber. She does some beautiful fabrics, colors. When I get stuck, which I do something really, really simple, and I'll just start piecing fabrics together and make pot holders or oven mitts or something like that, because it still keeps my creative juices going. And I love using prints in this kind of stuff. But in my work, I haven't used prints very much. This is a piece that I started, oh gosh, many years ago. I was doing a demonstration down at the Rife. Nancy Crow had suggested that they invite me to do a demonstration of improv quilting. And you can imagine the horror that I was shocked when I got the email that said referred by Nancy Crow. And this was when I hardly knew her really. And so, but it was such a thrill. And it was one of her shows that was curated, and it was just a great show. But this was a fun piece. So it just shows you a little bit of the process. I always use a design wall to put things up on. And so that's helpful. This one is called, what was this one called? Brisk Fall Day, I think, or something. And I had seen sumac. See this up in the left-hand corner, that sumac, it in contrast to the chartreuse greens, it just hit me like a brick. I just had to make something out of that combination. And so this piece was included in the Ohio Craft Museum Best of 2019. And I was thrilled that it sold. And one of my friends in an art quilt group that I belong to, and she was very new at the time. She said, "Weren't you astonished that that sold at that price?" And I said, "Well, yes, I guess so." But but she wasn't used to thinking of quilts as art. And so she has come around, I know, and we've talked about it many times and chuckled about it, but it does open up the whole conversation. I think this piece sold for maybe, I honestly can't remember. It was either $1,200 or $1,800, something like that, which, is a sizable amount of money. But I've also sold pieces for $3,200. So, I mean, I just want to share a little bit of my theory about that, is that as people, we teach people how to treat us by respecting our own time and our own studio time and things like that. And we also teach our audience how to respect us by the prices we put on things. And so if someone is willing to pay, their hard-earned money for a piece that I've made, I am humbled and happy. But I would rather give a piece away than sell it for too little. So it's, I don't know, that's just how I feel about that. But that's a whole nother conversation that we can have at some future time, perhaps. But these are some of my earlier pieces of my Reaching Out series. These were both 18 inches square and or 24 inches square. And the hardest part for me, I can only speak for me, but the hardest part for me is to start. So I always start a big project with doing some small projects, because once I get going on it, then it just sort of flows. So you can see the evolution of some of my Reaching Out pieces here. And again, I'm exploring format. So here's Reaching Out pieces, components, pieces and parts. And then I have it set up in a more kind of a traditional quilt pattern. So here's the piece that is hanging at the Rife and that was juried into the Quilt National. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about my personal critiquing of this and how I kind of judged it after I thought it was an okay piece to still improve it. This piece sat on my wall, like you see it up here in the top left-hand corner, for about 4 years. And that was while I was going back and forth from living in Ohio and then in Wisconsin and back and forth. And I worked on it for parts of times. I had the concept you could see. I had my color palette figured out, but life got in the way. And so I couldn't work on it as much as I might have enjoyed. And so Uh, as some of you know, my husband passed away in January of 20, and here was this still outline on my wall. And I needed to come up with something to do. I needed to finish this piece. And I'd had a sign over the door, my studio door at the time, with a QN on it, because I wanted to enter this piece into Quilt National. And so I thought, by going in and out of my studio door with that QN above it, maybe that would get into my brain. But anyway, so I finished this piece in time. And when I thought it was still at a good spot, but I knew it wasn't totally ready, I sat down and I wrote my critique for it. And I was pretty brutal with myself. And then at that point, I realized that there were some areas that really needed some investigation. And so those orange arrows, the lines that you might be able to see, those are 4 places where, after I wrote my review, I was saying to myself that it didn't have enough flow, that there wasn't enough darkness to help the eye bounce around. And that's one of the things that improv quilters, well, again, I can't speak for other people, but for myself, sometimes I don't want, in a traditional quilt, you definitely want to have your eye bounce around. And sometimes we don't want that to happen. I mean, we always want the eye to bounce, but we don't want the color to necessarily. Anyway, I decided I needed darkness to bring my eye around. And so I opened up the seams. I mean, it hadn't been quilted yet. So I opened up the seams and I added some darkness. And then over, let's see. I don't know if you can see, I guess I'm covering up part of it. But anyway, the white line is where, when I put it together originally, it was just a straight line. And I just didn't like how straight that was. And so I then went back in again and opened it up, and I put in a few little wedges, other pieces, and made it more interesting. The thing that I love about this piece, this is still my favorite piece that I've ever made. And I love it. I don't know how I did it. I mean, it just sort of came through to me. And I love how the colors, the tones in the 4 quadrants kind of give a nod to the traditional quilting. But there's just so much going on, and that color blending of the values within the color, it just really thrills me. And frankly, it has kind of sadly paralyzed me. I can't seem to get back to making something that I think is that good. But I just want to leave you with, that wasn't a very good upbeat note, was it? But the point is, you just have to keep working, and just be kind to yourself and cut yourself some slack, and continue to be curious. That's my job. I just always want to be curious. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, or you want to learn more about some of this other stuff in more detail, just let me know. But that about wraps it up, Kat.
That was wonderful. And I think your vulnerability in electing to share, folks, that like a great success has placed you in a different state of mind that you're working through, I think it's really important for folks to recognize they're not alone in that. That's a common experience. And I know you're going to work through it. You're going to do some small projects, and it's going to get to the bigger one, and it's going to be great. I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is from our friend Laura, who wants to know about sizes as you were going through it.
Oh,
Talk a little bit about the size. Now, you told us when you had smaller ones, right? So we know
yes.
like the pot holders and that, like we can understand those sizes. Talk about the other pieces.
Generally speaking, I like to keep it about 2 sizes, either 40 inches square, and I love a square shape. So most of them you'll notice are square, or 6 feet. So, or 7 feet, somewhere in that range. The 5 I'm working on now are going to be bigger than that. They're going to be 84 inches. So they're going to be big, but I love big. It makes an impact. It really You really can see it. And it gives me enough room to work and to put in information that I want the piece to have.
Wonderful. All right, so I'm going to ask you to do something. Go ahead and stop sharing, and I want to chat with you about licensing. I think
Okay.
way more artists need to know about that. So I'm going to spotlight you, and I am going to pin myself. And let's talk about licensing. How did you get there? I mean, one, I love that your arc went businesswoman first, and then realization that all that time you were an artist as well. I think a lot of people do the other way, and I love that you have had a different experience. But that aside, talk about licensing, please.
Well, because I make big pieces and because they are expensive, people can't always either find room on their walls and or the money to buy them. And yet I get a fulfillment. It's like applause for a performing artist. If someone wants to buy something I have made, that is equal to applause for me. And so I like that. I thrive on that. That's why I've been in retail for my whole entire life. And I always want to turn everything into a business, it seems. And so I have to kind of stop myself. But the print on demand and the licensing is something I'm still really developing. I mean, it's something that changes a lot in a short amount of time, just even since I started working with these things. So, but there's all kinds of places online. Those companies I mentioned, Spoonflower. I think lots of people have done something with Spoonflower. They have a division that they can make the pillows for you, make the table linens, make the bed linens for you, and so you don't have to just buy the fabric from them. You can have them provide you with the finished product, or you could just buy the fabric by the yard. And they have tons of different kinds of fabric. And you might want to just go there and just order a one-off of something. But I have a little store there, and it's just amazing to me. I get a commission check almost every month from someone buying something there. And then when I see what they've bought, then I like to go back and look at it and see how many yards they bought. I like to study it. So I kind of have a left and right brain of things. And I suppose it's because I was a businesswoman first, but I want to see why did they buy it? But that's also a big problem for artists, because as an artist, I want to make things I want to make. And I don't want to, I don't want my whole life to be about the marketing part of it. But frankly, again, I'll admit I love it when people respond to my work. So, but there's a million, Skillshare.com. There's a million places people can learn about these things. And because for a lot of my time, prior to 2012, prior to 2019, I spent a lot of time at home helping to care for my husband. And so when he was sleeping or didn't need me, I would be online learning things as fast as I could. And Skillshare was a good place to do that. But there's lots of formats to investigate that. And it would be an interesting forum to have a group of people get together and talk about. Because I think we all would love to have a stream of money coming in with, you just do it once and then it kind of can repeat itself.
I think that's a perfect segue. We've of course had comments in saying that the folks have really enjoyed this talk and that they so appreciate you. But let me insert and come back to that nice dovetail that you shared, which is, it'd be nice to have a few folks get together and talk about this. Talk a little bit about what community does for you. And you mentioned a few communities. And so the reason I'm asking this is that those that are already invested in their artistry, those that are getting started, or those that need a refresh or support in getting to their next goals. Talk a little bit about community for you and how it's served in those ways.
It I'm so glad you asked this question because it's pivotal. I really think that it is absolutely pivotal. We all want to think we can do it all on our own, and I'm probably a really good example of that. I'm a very spontaneous. I can do it. I'm independent kind of person, but really, it takes a whole bunch of people. I can see, I can't see very many of my friends because I don't want to be busy looking at friends and the names and things, but I know people are out there who really care about me. And we have gone through learning experiences in the arts and in business. And we just all support each other and nurture that. But it's very important to have people that you can talk to in a language that, maybe a neighbor, unless she's a super cool neighbor, Elizabeth, that might not understand about things. But if you can talk to people and use a language that you're both comfortable with or the group is comfortable with, it just opens everything up. I am a member of SACWA, like I mentioned. I have a local arts group that we get together on a monthly basis during the winter months, and that's a really important group for me. I have just a really good group of just friends that I've accumulated over the years, and I joke around about I'm not a very good friend because I'm so busy doing what my life calls me to do. So thank goodness these friends reach out to me and I can connect with them when they haven't heard from me for a while. But I think it's important to do that, to find a group and then keep expanding. Sometimes you outgrow a group or you want the group to expand with you. And so I think it's really important. Plays a big role in my life.
Lovely. So something that I think was really interesting in watching you talk about your trajectory is that nothing was left behind from your jewelry days. There are still core tenets from what I saw visually, the aesthetic of it, the visual texture and design that all is at play in your textiles. Talk a little more about that and how you see that and are threading those needles, pun intended.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing because, there are classes that you can take that say, find your voice. And I'm not degrading those kind of classes, but I think the best way to find your voice is to just do the work. Because as you do the work, and in those pictures that I showed from the very beginning of my quilting time to where I am now, it has changed dramatically. Because I didn't know that I could cut a piece of fabric with my arm without a ruler. I hadn't thought about it. So that it's just so important to be able to do that. But so you just find your voice just shows up. You don't have to go looking for it. It's there. And one of my cousins who's on this call, I see her smiley face. When I first started making quilts, she saw one of my quilts and she goes, "Oh my God, that looks just like your jewelry." And I didn't see that, but she saw it. And so it's just the way it is. I can't help it. It just, you have to not be impatient. It's going to come. You have to do 10,000 hours of work, right? Isn't that what some very smart person said a few years back?
So, talk to me a little bit about who is inspiring you right now as artists. And they can be textile artists, they can be any kind of artist, it could be anywhere. But what's inspiring you right now? Who is inspiring you right now?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Part of my learning process and exploration, because I didn't have that element of college, and I did take a few art history classes, but I am really inspired by the Impressionist painters. I think that some of the bravery that they illustrated by trying new techniques and new new ways and getting away from a brush, but using a let's see, now I can't remember what you call it, the palette knife. So anyway, but I'm very inspired by that era of painting and the quality, the lasting quality that they can put into their work. And that's one of the things I haven't talked about, but quality is just really important to me. I would, for my whole life as an adult, I always said I would rather not have a sofa in my house than have a cheap sofa. I want a good piece of furniture. And so, but I think quality is just very important. And so, people like Nancy Crow, she's definitely a mentor to me and inspires me. She just had a solo show out in Lincoln, Nebraska last year, and it's remarkable what she has accomplished. And so many other women in that same age group and caliber are just the leaders of our industry, and it wouldn't exist without people taking big risks like that. I also love reading books about Lee Krasner and how much more important she was to her husband than anybody knew. And so there's I'm just always learning and listening. I'm reading several books at a time on audible.com. And so it's really I don't know, I get inspiration from every single thing. There isn't just one person or one thing. And it's hard to exactly explain because I just feel like it just kind of, I feel like I'm a snowball and I just kind of roll along and absorb all the information that is available to me. And I wish it could be osmosis because there's only so many hours in a day.
I hear you on that, but I also love the fact that you call out the importance of that kind of free range, intentional deep dive. Like as things inspire you, you dive deep into them. I think that's really important. And I think it's really clear in your work. When you said that you were inspired by the Impressionists, I was like, oh, yes, that piece, it makes sense. The way that you play color against each other, and as you're farther away, it blends and has a soft variation that you could imagine as one piece. But as you get closer, you recognize it's an individual color that was really smartly thought out, even in the kind of top bracket where you have that soft yellow going into the soft blue, and it just looks like light coming into that. So yeah, good on you. It's seeping in, right?
Thank you. Yeah. And if you're, I always like to say that if your brain hears what you are thinking and what you say to yourself. And so that's why I'm constantly listening to things about art related and other artists, because I don't have to work that hard putting it there. Then it just gets there and then it just comes out. One of my favorite people to listen to is Dr. Deepak Chopra. And he always says that the air that we breathe in is what was exhaled by Monet and Matisse and, all of the people before us. My mother, my father, all of those elements are out there for us to just soak up. And so it's kind of on the edge, but I believe that I can absorb all of that and put it to work for me. So that's what I try to do.
That's wonderful. So I think we didn't talk about this, but we probably should. Your piece received an award, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Let's talk a little bit. What was that award?
It QSDS is a organization, event that takes place here in Columbus every year, and it was started I don't know how many years ago. I should know that, shouldn't I? I don't know, but it was a long time ago. It takes place over on the campus of the College of Art and Design now, CCAD, and it was just a thrill. And it's a surface design award, but there is no surface design on my piece. And so sometimes people were confused because they thought that, why did you get that award? But they just support the effort. They don't necessarily pick a piece with surface design on it. But I do take classes at QSDS in surface design and love it. It's also another organization locally here in Ohio that is phenomenal that people from all over the country come to. And also Nancy Crow was a co-founder of it. So again, she has really influenced so many of the things that we take for granted nowadays.
Yeah, it's really a pioneer, right? And I mean, QNSDS is quilt and surface design. So,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, it still tracks.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm honored. It's a thrill, and to have gotten in. Period. And I only had 12 hours. I was doing the application, and I had 12 hours to spare for the call for entry. So when I got the email that I was in, I just thought, wow, this is pretty incredible. So I just have to keep working and keep making so that I can keep doing.
I think that is the most excellent note to end on. I think we can all take that with us to heart and to work. So I will close this out and say thank you again, Donalee, for such a great presentation. Thank you all for joining us for this Artist Talk by Donalee Kennedy as a part of our programming for the Quilt National 2021, the Best of Contemporary Quilts. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Dairy Barn for putting on such a phenomenal biennial exhibition, to all the artists that are participating in the show, as well as to the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the OAC, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.